Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of The Nonprofit World. You know, a lot of wonderful things are being accomplished by nonprofit organizations in our area and around the country. And this is the show where you find out what they're up to and how you can have a role in them as well. For nonprofits to have a successful mission, people who lead nonprofit groups really have to be creative. Sometimes they have to apply techniques that are usually known in the for-profit world. But how do you blend the two? Today we'll find out because our guest is an expert in that. We're delighted to be joined by Scala. Scott is the founder of Scala and Associates, and he spent decades working with groups, advising them on how to accomplish their goals in the short term and in the long run. And the mission of Scala and Associates is to foster excellence in the nonprofit sector through successful fund development. Welcome, Scott. A delight to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure.
This is an interesting field, the world of nonprofits. How did you come to be associated with it?
Well, I started out in 1990 thinking I was going to be a school teacher. I was substitute teaching but couldn't quite land a full-time job and had gone to college, graduate school, to go into teaching. But I was offered an opportunity to go into administration, and it was through my work as an educational administrator that a change in my career really happened. And I continued for 17 years until I experienced job loss. And it was experiencing that job loss that came after what really I thought was a career that would continue for the rest of my working years, that I shifted. I found myself working for a nonprofit organization here in Connecticut, a wonderful mission, but lost my job after a year. And what I always share with people is that I lost my job at a time when I was new in the state. My wife is from Connecticut, but I'm from New York State originally, so I really had very few professional contacts. We had a 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old son at home and a 5-week-old baby, and we were closing on our new home the next day. So I said, all right, it's time to make a shift.
I think some people call that a perfect storm.
A perfect storm, my come to Jesus moment, whatever we want to call it. But it was a turning point in my life, and it was then that I really did make a shift in my career, and I started Scala and Associates and never looked back, and it's been going strong now 11 years.
Back then, I would imagine that nonprofits had sort of a hodgepodge way of getting their funds together, how to keep their missions alive and going. What was it like back then?
In the Stone Ages? Yeah. Well, keep in mind that around 1990 to 95, which is really those early years for me, we didn't have as many nonprofits as we have today. We have just over 1 million nonprofits in the United States, a few 100,000 back then. So there were fewer nonprofits competing for the same dollars, the same attention, the same space, if you will, in the community. Also, what was different then is how people went about funding their nonprofits. You know, we didn't have social media. We didn't really have internet up until 1995, 1996. So the option now that we have to raise revenue through social media and other things like Facebook and GoFundMe, and it just didn't exist. It was much harder. I had a sense back then that we were very much in the trenches. And remember, I was working in-house for nonprofits then, so I can see it now from both sides. Now as a consultant to nonprofits, but then working in-house. And you definitely had a sense that you were in the trenches fighting to fulfill that mission. Not that we don't have that today, but the processes that exist today are much different than years ago. It's much more streamlined and lends itself to building the capacity of the organization long-term and sustaining it. That's the key. Building it, but sustaining it.
So fast forward now to 2018. We do have the internet. We do have GoFundMe projects. But we also don't have things that used to be around. For example, the United Way, a wonderful group, doesn't reach into as many areas as it used to just because jobs are different now. There aren't as many large employers. That puts challenges on people like you and the organization that you run. what are some of the new thinking methods to bring people around to seeing their nonprofits in ways that looks toward the future and can plan for the long term? I believe the term that's in use is called capacity building. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is continuing to be an emerging trend. It really took shape, I would say, since 2000, the early 2000s. Had started in the 1990s, but really took shape after that. That is one of the three things we do at Scala and Associates, so I know quite a bit about capacity building. The other two areas are everything under the umbrella of grants, and then, of course, the education and training that comes with working with boards of directors. But capacity building has been the one area that has shown the most growth over, let's say, the past decade or so. And the reason for that is, first of all, it's embraced by community foundations in particular. Other foundations do support it. But community foundations have funds allocated to support nonprofits through grants to then go out and hire consultants, neutral parties to come in and implement capacity building, which is a very systematic approach to, first of all, assessing the nonprofit's ability to build its own capacity, largely through its current structure, including staffing, board development, and various fund development practices. It assesses that. Second, it plans for it to be successful within all of those components, and then ultimately, and something I care very much about, is help with implementation of the plan. I have gone into too many nonprofits where the former process ended at the plan and didn't continue on with the implementation. So I personally will not take on a capacity building project if it doesn't include the implementation piece, because I certainly don't want my plan sitting on a shelf and it's not successful for the organization. And for me as the consultant, I will have not done my job properly if the implementation is not something that I assist with.
It sounds like the first step, the assessment, is sort of the look in the mirror phase. Mm-hmm. What's that like when someone like you walks in the door to an organization that's been around, maybe struggling a little bit, and they're forced to look in the mirror?
Yeah. Well, I come in, any consultant comes in to the nonprofit sector wanting to bring about change. And as human beings, we don't deal well with change. It's not within our genetic makeup, I don't think, for most of us. But the mindset really has to be that the consultant comes in to implement some change. With that comes an assessment. I have a multi-point assessment checklist that I will sit down at the offices of the nonprofit organization and really go through their current fund development practices. I will look at their infrastructure, their staffing model. Do they have a development staff? In other words, the fundraisers, the grant writer, the development officer, et cetera. Or is the executive director the one doing the development work? Or is it a volunteer? Or somebody on the board? Sometimes we see that. And what is the board composition? What does that look like? How often do they meet? What is their role in moving the mission of the organization beyond governance? You asked me about what was different then versus now. Well, back then, all we heard was the board should govern, the board should govern, the board should govern. Mm-hmm. These days, the mantra is, and not just my own, but certainly the theme in the sector is, they also must be owners of the fund development process. In other words, the financial support that comes in, and also controlling the expenses that go out, because if there's no control over the fund development practices, there will be nothing to govern. You see, the two go hand in hand.
It almost sounds like sweat equity.
Sweat equity. Yeah, we can't just be on boards to build resumes or to have something to do. Mm-hmm. I'm simplifying it, but sometimes I meet boards that really don't take seriously the role that they have. So we look at all of that, we assess it. We also will do confidential surveys. These are very telling of the board and key staff members, key meaning the leadership staff, let's say, and even program managers and so forth. Confidential in that only I will know the outcome of those assessments. And so I then put those results, again, without identifying any people, to the comments in a report and a presentation back to the organization very telling. I have been in those meetings where you see the eyes just widen. I didn't know people thought that way, or I didn't know that was an issue, or that's a missed opportunity, you know? Mm-hmm. And those are some of the outcomes that I, as a consultant, look for. I want to see where those opportunities are and where people maybe have missed the boat. And frankly, what is working? You know, it's not always gloom and doom. So often we discover many things that are working very well. So from that assessment, we then go to the next step, which is the planning phase. And the planning phase is multifaceted. I like to attach the plan to the organization's fiscal year. Sure. And then we look at every component. Let's say if we're talking about fund development, we're looking at your annual appeals, if you have annual appeals, the way you communicate with and approach individual donors, the way you steward major gift opportunities and those donors. Those opportunities are very different from your annual appeal and your $25 and $50 donors, who are very important, but you approach major giving very differently. Planned giving, is that an option where we're looking at bequests, and if so, how do we communicate that? It's a very communication, marketing driven initiative, planned giving. Is an endowment a possibility? You know, colleges, universities, hospitals do endowments very well. The general nonprofit sector, not always. Because they don't know enough about it, and we tend not to do what we don't understand, and that certainly is true. So we look at all of those things and the staffing and the board composition that it will take to move all of that along, and then the implementation comes in, and that's where I continue at helping them take those baby steps to move forward.
Of those three, is there one that's more particularly challenging?
The implementation is really where you see who's got it and who doesn't, because it's easy to sit in a meeting and say, this is how I feel during the audit phase or during the unveiling of the results and even the planning phase, to say, great, looks good, terrific. But when it comes to the implementation, that's when you see who really is on board. And I have been with a few organizations where they lose a board member. And sometimes the executive director is appalled, or the board chair, if it's not the board chair who is left, will be appalled. And I say, don't be appalled. It's okay. This person now has been freed. They can go and do other things. This wasn't right for them. If you want to sustain the mission of your organization, this is part of the change. Often that's not the case, though, Jerry. People do stay on, and most adopt that new way of doing business.
Because they've made an investment in your advice and know they have an issue that needs to be solved or two.
Right. They've made an investment in time, in money, in energy, in changing the dynamics of the way they do business. And by the time of implementation, they have become so vested in the process that it would be foolish not to continue. I also try to make it very easy, frankly, for the board of directors. We can't ask the board of directors to do the staff's job. I think if there are gaps in staffing, we need to look at how to fill those gaps in staffing. The board members are typically very busy people, and I serve on one or two boards, one national, one local. So I, again, can see it from both sides. Ask board members to do very specific, high-level things that will yield good results, quality results. For example, help us leverage some relationships in the community where they don't currently exist. That's something that most people will wrap their minds around. I would rather see board members help us connect the dots in the community than worry about fundraising. That's when you see them just melt down, because they're typically not fundraisers. And I typically don't ask boards to fundraise, but help us connect the dots to those relationships, and let I say us, meaning the nonprofit organization under my counsel, help to cultivate that donor. But the relationship piece is so instrumental in getting to that next step.
I know that one of the things you bring to your practice is, when you get to the implementation phase, is patience. That patience is required to fulfill the big plan. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, patience is something also I think as human beings we don't tend to manage well, but patience is absolutely required when working in the nonprofit sector, especially in the area of fund development. And the reason for that is it's a process. And any process worthwhile, and this certainly is in building the capacity of the nonprofit, must be approached with a sense of patience. When you're impatient with the process, that's when mistakes happen, missed opportunities are there. Years ago, before I started with Scala and Associates, I worked for a healthcare organization, and I remember one visit in particular, a wealthy person in the community that had a relationship with the healthcare organization. And when I came back, the CEO, who was my supervisor, said, "Well, how much did she donate?" And I said, "This was my first visit. We're getting to know each other. We're building trust. We're building a sense of a rapport, a sense of what comes next." I said, "This is not how it works." It was a hard sell there when you don't come back with a check. But, you know, and I really think it was months down the road that the philanthropy began. And months sometimes is a great track record. Often it's years. But those major gifts, I'm talking about major giving. In this case, it's such a personal thing. When somebody's giving a significant amount of their money, they must truly be treated well, communicated with properly, as you and I would probably want in a business relationship, especially one that was hitting our wallet. You know, you want to make sure that that trust is there, and you can't build it with a sense of impatience.
Can we divert for a while? What sorts of groups have you worked with in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I only work with nonprofit organizations. I have been approached by for-profit companies or even individuals like professors at colleges and so forth, but only with nonprofit organizations. Anything and everything. We've worked with hospitals, we've worked with universities and colleges, smaller nonprofits, nonprofits with budgets that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and those with budgets of, let's say, $300,000. You know, but what's interesting is that the need is all the same. It's just a different scale. They all need, if we do things properly, and that's how I roll. The grants have to be there. The volunteerism hopefully is there. The board working at a proper level has to be there. Whether it's a board of 10 or a board of 20, it has to be there. The diversity in fund development. If you're all government funding, and it sounds like a great story to tell, it's not. We now know, especially in our state of Connecticut, that if you are relying on government funding wholly, that much, it can be a little troublesome. And that is true in most states, not just certainly here. Those nonprofit organizations that take the time to build the capacity through, let's say, diversified fund development, all of those various fund development aspects that we just discussed, are the ones that are more likely to sustain themselves long term, because as one shrinks, the others pick up. As one grows, the others change. And it's the cycle of things. It's like not keeping all your money in one stock. Diversify your portfolio, you're more likely to retain those funds 10, 20 years down the road.
Are you able to share a few success stories that you've had along the way? People who've gone, "Oh, wow, this really worked. I'm glad I listened to you."
Well, one of the things I have found with many organizations is that they have stories to tell. For example, any social service or human service organization has a story to tell, but many just become consumed by the statistics and they drown in data. Data is important. It helps to support and substantiate that need. How we know the need is there, well, here's the data. But the stories get to show the community, the potential funder, your partners out there, the impact you're making, how you're changing lives, whether it be children, the homeless, people receiving meals from soup kitchens, those in shelter, animals being cared for. The stories tell it all. And I have never worked with a nonprofit organization where I couldn't uncover some story to tell. And then telling that story, as I did, let's say last year for an annual appeal, a first annual appeal for a nonprofit, it brought in 6 times what other efforts had done previously through letter campaigns and things that they did. But this was a more formalized appeal process, and they were delighted with the results, and all they did was tell the story. I interviewed the individual with permission, and they had a story to tell. They sure did.
Yes, 6-fold is quite an increase. Difficult to sustain maybe, but I'm sure it made an impact on their future to be able to have that nest egg.
Yeah, and by no means will that 6-fold increase continue. I mean, when you go from very little to 6-fold, that's a great jump. But moving forward, it will just grow more modestly. But the point is, it will grow and it will continue. But 6-fold from a few $1,000s can really be substantial for a small nonprofit organization, regardless of how many times over it increased. The point is, it did increase, and the story is the reason why. So that's just one example of something that I think nonprofits can look to do as they're looking to build their capacity in fund development and tell those stories.
You also work with faith-based groups. Are there any characteristics that make them different from organizations that are not?
Well, I think what faith-based groups have to be careful about in, let's say, when it comes to fund development and the funds that are needed to build the capacity and sustain the mission long term, is that if their work in any way is restricted to people of a certain faith, if they only will provide services to Catholics or Jewish people, or et cetera, it's fine if that's your mission and you're true to your mission, fine. But do understand that there are people who, and funders, most funders, even those that give to faith-based groups, who will see that as a negative, discriminatory in a way. So just be cautious when you're a faith-based group as to whether or not you are in any way restrictive to the population. If it's true to your mission to be so, fine, but you'll have to live with some consequences and other advantages. But if you can broaden your scope and really appeal to those with the umbrella of faith to the service that you're providing, you will open up, you're more likely to open up other channels of support.
That makes perfect sense. Volunteers, in many cases, are the backbone of a successful mission. What sort of things do you bring in your planning and implementation that activates volunteers, that gets them involved, and hopefully even brings in new volunteers?
Well, volunteerism is one of the areas on the capacity building audit or assessment. So we do look at the volunteer base, and we do that because even in areas where, let's say, the staffing is slim, is there an opportunity for a volunteer to step into that role? It doesn't have to be permanent. Volunteers do come and go, but it could be an opportunity to get a skilled volunteer who, let's say, lives and breathes social media, as many young people do, to come in and assist with that. Something that's often not done well or at all in nonprofits is a social media impact. But maybe there's a young volunteer who can assist there. We look for those opportunities in the assessment, and then it becomes part of the planning process. And then we discuss who do we know currently who might have an interest in volunteering, and then how do we seek out that type of support. Also, a wonderful thing for boards to do is to reach into their network to garner some volunteer support. Boards will love any opportunity not to necessarily go through a Rolodex to ask for money, which I get because I don't necessarily like it either when I'm asked to do that. Happier to build relationships. But when you ask, is there anybody you know who might have an interest enough to help through volunteerism, then you see the mind starting to work. So boards are tapped into the community. Your staff members, of course, tapped into the community. And community foundations are great resources for people, too, to go back to their local community foundation, say, we're in need of volunteers, or even board members. Community foundations have a finger on the pulse of things by design. So go to your community foundation and do ask for assistance, whether it be through additional volunteerism from people in the community that they may have identified, board service. things of that nature, people to serve on a subcommittee to help with volunteerism. Volunteerism is the backbone when it comes to supporting nonprofits with time and resources, often in areas that nonprofits can't afford to sustain on their own.
That's all looking at it from the organization's point of view. Let's turn this around and talk about individuals, people at home watching this, people on their mobile devices now watching this, of course. They're now inspired to become volunteers. What sort of tips do you give to people who are thinking of, hey, maybe it's time for me to get involved with things, to have my family involved?
Sure. I actually do have 3 tips that I give to people who are thinking of working with a nonprofit organization in some way. Another way to not just build your own capacity, but help the nonprofit do that as well for themselves and move that mission. So the first is, if you have a child in your life, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, a godparent, an aunt, an uncle, if you can engage that child in philanthropy, volunteerism, charitable work at an early age, what a wonderful gift. We have 2 sons who are now 19 and 13. When they were each about 7, 8 years old, we started them off with, whether it be giving at church or out of their own piggy bank, or with my older son especially working at the soup kitchen in Bristol with me, which was a combined parish effort, assisting maybe with some work that my wife and I do on a voluntary basis with our church's Haiti ministry. Starting the child in your life or children in your life at an early age, get them engaged. You will have somebody with a philanthropic mindset maybe for the rest of their life. So that's very important. The second is, try to choose a nonprofit organization where the mission is closely aligned with what's in your heart. When you do that, you are more likely to stay on and be engaged with that nonprofit organization long term. It's a win-win for you and for the nonprofit organization.
An example might be?
If you have had yourself or family with maybe cancer in your history, your family, consider volunteering for the American Cancer Society or some other cancer or disease-related organization. Heart problems, I have that in my family. I've worked in the past with the American Heart Association. You see, if you find that connection that really is moving to you, you're more likely to stay with that nonprofit long-term. It's important, rather than it be just a temporary thing. And lastly, understand, please, as volunteers, the need is not just around the holidays, it's all year round. So I think when people understand the need is now, the need is in spring, summer, fall, it's all year round. Volunteers are often welcomed at any point, as are our dollars, not just around the holidays, but all year round, because nonprofits have to function continuously, uninterrupted. Their programs must be sustained uninterrupted to really have that true impact.
In closing, this is a challenging time to be involved with a nonprofit. Our worser angels are on our shoulders as a society these days. But on the other hand, what is these days, this year, the most rewarding thing about being involved in a nonprofit?
For me personally, or are you asking me in terms of?
For you and for others, for both.
For me personally, I have been in this industry now 28 years in total. I will do this until, my last breath. I love my work. I love my work. And to be engrossed in many different nonprofits that seem to now more than ever really take the time to be sponges and listen to education and direction and guidance and counsel, and then assistance with the implementation. That's so rewarding to me when you can see those changes you're making, and then ultimately the change it's having on the people that they serve. So for me personally, that's it. I think in general, my message to people who are thinking about becoming involved in nonprofits is to know that your time with those nonprofits really does matter. And you can have a lasting impact on the lives of people or animals or whatever the mission is serving if you just give your time and attention to that work. It's been rewarding for me for 28 years, and I hope for another 28 at least.
A valuable message. Thank you very much, Scott.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Well, pleasure to have you here today. We've been speaking with Scott Scala. He is the head and founder of Scala Associates, a consulting group that works with nonprofits of all ilks.
Hello, and welcome to the nonprofit world, where we highlight organizations and individuals passionate about empowering people to make a difference in the lives of others, serving in our community and around the world. I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean, guest host for today's program. And I want to introduce you to Scott Heth. He is the Executive Director for Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Glad you're here with us today. Scott has 30 years experience with the National Audubon Society. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Forestry from the University of Vermont. He is certified to teach in Connecticut schools and has an extensive experience in environmental education and conservation. And in addition to that, he is a licensed wildlife rehabilitator.
I am.
That sounds like a great opportunity to help out a lot of creatures that need assistance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Scott, tell us a little bit about the history of Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut.
So Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut started in 1969. So coming up, we're going to have our 50th anniversary, which we're very excited about. It started at what's now called the Harry C. Barnes Memorial Nature Center, with the purchase of a piece of property there, and that was all facilitated by volunteers at the time. And then eventually a facility was built, the Nature Center itself. And from then on, we started reaching out to the community to basically get people to understand about nature, learn about nature, having experiences in nature through naturalists and through trails and things like that. Eventually, we got the Indian Rock Nature Preserve, and that was in 1977. And we continue to grow. Since then, we now have about 730 acres of land that we protect, in addition to the education facilities that we have.
Okay. I love the mission statement, to inspire the appreciation and enjoyment of nature through education and conservation, fostering a healthy environment and an improved quality of life.
Well said.
So that's like a three-part mission statement.
It really is, and I think each part leads to the next part. Mm-hmm. So, we want to inspire people of all ages to get outside, to experience what nature has to offer. And of course, there's lots of different benefits to being outside: educational benefits, health benefits, social benefits. And we're hoping that will lead to people becoming good stewards of the environment. So, fostering a healthy environment. And because we're fostering a healthy environment, we're improving quality of life. Mm-hmm. So we spent a lot of time crafting that mission statement to really make sure that it fit what we thought our goals and objectives were.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. The Environmental Learning Centers has a lot of hands-on programs.
Yep.
Could you tell us a little bit about those programs?
Sure. So, to inspire the appreciation and enjoyment of nature, our main focus is education. And our main demographic right now are school children. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of programs, field trips from schools and to schools. We educate about 20,000 kids a year on various different topics having to do with the environment. Really trying to make sure that our programs are meshed with the state and national standards, education standards. So not only are we giving students a good experience, but we're also helping teachers meet their mandated curriculum. We also do, we have a very big summer camp, the Indian Rock Summer Camp.
Okay.
And about 120 kids per week, each week over the course of the summer. So it gives us the opportunity to get kids outside for longer extended periods of time than what they would normally do on a 2 to 3 hour field trip. So we sort of immerse them in nature, give them some tools to be able to understand the natural world and experience it for summer camp.
And what is the age group for the children coming to summer camp?
It's 5 to 15.
5 to 15.
Well, it's I should say kindergarten through 10th grade we have programming for. And then we have what's called a CIT program, Counselor in Training Program, where kids who are older than that can take a course and then can actually help us teach the classes.
Are those usually kids that have been through the program themselves?
A lot of them are. A lot of them are, and a lot of my staff actually have gone through the summer camp originally as well.
So the Environmental Learning Center of Connecticut also serves as a land trust and with protection of the land. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
You can't inspire the appreciation of nature without land itself. So we really strive to improve the integrity of our existing properties by adding property to that and managing that property for wildlife, for education, for recreational purposes. So we have several properties that are distributed in Bristol, in Southington, and in Burlington, Connecticut. That we do just that. We either use for educational purposes or manage for wildlife, particularly wildlife that is what's considered either endangered, threatened, or species of special concern in the state of Connecticut.
Okay. I saw on your website that the Harry C. Barnes Memorial Nature Center has some new exhibits.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the new exhibits and some of the live animals that you have?
We, a couple of years ago, we did a complete renovation on the inside of the Nature Center using a lot of volunteer support, which was really great, empowering volunteers to put their creativity out there and make some really nice exhibits. So we have what we call Harry's Treehouse, which is an area where people can walk up a little ramp, and there's a tree in the middle of it, and then surrounding that tree are all kinds of exhibits, tank exhibits, where we have various different snakes and amphibians and turtles and insects and various things that people can look at and learn from. Then we have an area where we have live birds. We have some birds that have been rehabilitated but can't be released because their injuries are such that they wouldn't survive in the wild. And so we have a barred owl, we have 2 eastern screech owls, and we have a red-tailed hawk. And then we have a children's discovery room where real young kids can go in and just basically tactily touch things in nature and learn about things by putting puzzles together and various different things like that. So we're trying to cater to people from that toddler age all the way up to senior citizen and everybody in between. So it creates a really nice hands-on type of experience. And then, of course, we have trails. So the whole idea is that we want our interior of the Nature Center not to be standalone. We want that to be the catalyst to get people outside. Because that's the ultimate goal, is to get people outside.
What age group do you think gets most excited about coming into the center there?
That's a good question, and I think I've seen people of all ages get excited depending on what they're looking at. Obviously the children really like it a lot, but we're really trying to do more programs for adults because I think that they also have the innate desire to protect the environment and protect nature, and everybody just needs the tools and the information to be able to do that.
Right. Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
You talked about the Indian Rock Nature Preserve. How did it get its name?
There is an Indian Rock, and Indian Rock is actually a rock that's right next to Route 69, Wolcott Road in Bristol, and that road used to be a main thoroughfare for the Tungus Indians. And the property that is consists of Indian Rock Nature Preserve now was the preferred hunting grounds for the Tungus Indians who came from their settlement next to the Farmington River. Mm-hmm. And so they would trek from the Farmington River to the Indian Rock area, which was called Morgan's Swamp, and hunt, but they couldn't get back the same day. So they would stay overnight under Indian Rock. Was kind of like the days in of the time, which is basically a rock with a cavity underneath and an overhang, so it could fit several people. Mm-hmm. And it actually, if you go into the cavity, which we have our kids do all the time, that's a favorite thing for them to do. And if you look up underneath the ceiling of the cave, you can see remnants of smoke from centuries of fires that were built in there. Wow. during the time. So, and if you can do a search on the internet for Indian Rock, Bristol, there's all kinds of folklore about it and stuff.
Yeah, okay, all right. And I understand too that there are some Indian housing on some of the trails, or on one of the trails, wigwams.
There's some wigwams.
Uh-huh.
They're not original.
No, okay.
No, those were recreated. So because we're Indian Rock and because of the legacy of Indian Rock, we do quite a bit of Native American programming to show people how Native Americans revered the environment and used nature to help them survive, but didn't do it in an exploitive kind of manner. They really respected nature and the sustainability of nature. So we've created two recreations of Native American wigwams, which were places where the Native Americans would stay with their families. And so we do programs in there. We light a fire. We talk about the food that the Native Americans would eat and the games that their families would play and the tools that they would make out of bones and stones and vegetation. So it creates, and it's in a really nice conifer forest right up against our pond. So it really makes for a nice illusion of going back into time and becoming a Native American themselves. Mm-hmm.
Now, are there hiking trails both at Indian Rock and at the Memorial Nature Center?
There are, so the Indian Rock Nature Preserve is not open for general visitation.
Okay. At
this point. I may change that at some point, but right now it's not. And the reason is because we have kids there for programs all the time, and I need to kind of monitor who's on site. So, but we do have public programs and events there all the time, so we do get the public to come in to see Indian Rock, and that's where our camp is and everything. Mm-hmm. But the Harry C. Barnes Nature Center is our community nature center. It's open for general visitation. The trails are open dawn to dusk every day of the year, so even if the building's not open, you could go out onto the trails. And the trail actually, once you get into our woods, actually connects to the Connecticut Blue Trail.
Okay.
And you can walk from the Barnes Nature Center to the Sessions Woods Wildlife Management Area through the woods. Okay. And and Sessions Woods is in Burlington, Connecticut. Barnes Nature Center is in Bristol, so it's kind of a nice trek, and it's a great way to connect two really great facilities.
So do you have some short trails and long trails?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, so we have what's called a Red Trail, and that was actually renamed recently Elmer's Way. Elmer Madsen was one of the volunteers who helped start the organization way back in 1969 and was still involved with us up until recently when he passed away. And we named what we call the Red Trail, which is a very short loop, very easy hike after him. And then all the other trails sort of loop out from there. They'll loop back onto each other unless you get on the blue trail, and then you can go further afield. So it's a really nice system of trails for if you just want to go for a half-hour walk with some young kids, or if you want to go a little bit further, you can.
And where is the starting point of the trail?
Right at the nature center.
Right at the
itself.
nature center.
Yeah, right on Shrub Road, 175 Shrub Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Easy to get to.
Yeah, it's very easy.
That's great. That's great. So what kind of volunteer opportunities do you have at the centers?
So we rely on volunteers a lot. We have a very small staff. And in order for us to do all the work that we do, we involve community members. And it becomes really a program in itself because those community members learn new skills, learn about the environment when they become volunteers, and they also become the ambassadors for our organization. So they come and they volunteer with us, and then they go back into their communities and they talk about all the great experiences that they've had. So we have volunteer opportunities that range from animal care. So we have people who come in, for example, to the Barnes Nature Center, and they'll take care of the snakes and the birds and the amphibians and all the stuff that's there. We have people who are docents, volunteer docents, or kind of greeters who are there at the Nature Center, who, when people come in, they help show them around and act like guides and things. And we have, over at Indian Rock, we actually have a education farm. So we have a couple cows and sheep and chickens and turkeys and a pig and a rabbit and, all that stuff. And so we have volunteers that on a regular basis will come open the farm, feed the animals, come close the farm, and take care of them in between. But we also have opportunities for people who want to help educate, do a program. Maybe somebody has a specialization in trees, for example, and they'll come and do a tree program for us. Or they'll get trained and help do some of our programs that we do on a regular basis. We have people come in who help with trail maintenance and maintenance in general. And we do a lot of special events. So, for example, at the Barnes Nature Center, we do something called Spring Fair. Or at Indian Rock, we do Santa's Farm and pancake breakfast and things like that. So we rely on volunteers a lot to help us put those events on. And we actually have a full-time dedicated staff person who's our volunteer coordinator. Okay. And so we were able to bring Erin on, and she does the outreach. Sometimes it's awfully hard for organizations to manage volunteers because it does take time, training, nurturing, for recruitment and retaining the volunteers. And so she is able to dedicate the majority of her time, in addition to animal care, to recruit and manage our volunteers.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Spring is coming up.
It is.
Can you tell us a little bit about the spring fair and when it's going to be? And do you have any of those details in place yet?
I do. I'm trying to think of the date right now, make sure I don't give the wrong date, but I'm pretty sure it's May 12th.
Okay.
And it's a free event at the Barnes Nature Center. And so we have vendors there, we have music. The Bristol Garden Club will be there selling plants in honor of spring. Bristol Rotary Club works with us, and they'll be providing food and other things. The Bristol and Meriden Gem and Mineral Clubs will be there doing education on geology. So I'm a firm believer of partnerships. I really think it's important to include other organizations in what we do, so we're not reinventing the wheel. We could do a geology program, but it's better to have the Gem and Mineral Club, who has that expertise to do that sort of thing.
That's great.
So it's a really fun event. It's a good time of year to get out. I think any time of year is a good time of year to get out, but particularly in early spring, it's a fun time to get out.
Yeah, that's great. How are you funded? How is the Environmental Center funded?
So we're a private nonprofit, not-for-profit organization, and we're funded through contributions. Primarily, I am constantly working with people and trying to get them into the fold, so to speak, and help support the organization. We do have various very generous corporations who help us and foundations who help us. We used to get quite a bit of support through state education grants through the state of Connecticut. Unfortunately, the way the budget is now, we don't have a lot of that kind of support, and we're hoping that will change. But we're able to make up for that with the corporate sponsorships and the individual gifts and foundations and things like that.
Okay. And do you work with the board of directors? And is
Yeah, I do, and I'm hired. I work for the board of directors. We call them board of trustees, Environmental Learning Center's board of trustees, and basically they govern the overall mission and operation of the organization, and I'm in charge for the day-to-day. So I work with them. They tell me what they think our mission is, and help to define that and help to define our policies, and within those constraints, I do the day-to-day.
so would your organization be looking for additional members of the board, or are they, what type of person are you looking for, or what qualifications are you looking for in a board member?
Great question. Yes, we're always looking for new board members. We do have term limits, so we try to rotate people through so that we get fresh ideas. So we're looking for people who, above all, have a keen interest in the environment, so protecting the environment, because that's our mission. So we need someone who agrees and supports our mission. But we're looking for people who have education experience, people who have land management experience, finance experience, legal, all the types of stuff that we encounter from day to day that we could, HR type of experience, insurance, all that stuff that a nonprofit has to deal with, and can use the expertise from board members to help do that.
That's great. How would somebody contact you if they're interested in volunteering, if they're interested in being a board member, or even a teacher who's interested in coming to bring her students to you? What's the best way to contact you?
Well, we have many different ways. We have our website, which is www.elcct.org. That has a lot of our information on it. We have an email address, which is info@elcct.org, just INFO, so people can email us or give us a call. And our phone number is 860-583-1234, so it's fairly easy to remember.
One of the things that I noticed too is that you rent out your facilities for various functions, conference meetings,
Yep.
Private functions. And is that both the Memorial Center, Nature Center, and the Indian Rock?
So yes, both, but primarily Indian Rock Nature Preserve,
Okay.
because that's, I think, the biggest facility that we have, and it has the opportunity for different rooms, for meetings, for example. If someone wants to have breakout sessions, they can do that. It's something that we're starting to get into a little bit heavier, because we do have the facilities, and we would like them to be utilized all the time. Mm-hmm. So it's a great place for corporate retreats, for meetings, we've done weddings, various different events like that. And it works out really well. We have a staff person who helps coordinate the events. Mm-hmm. But we also rent out the Barnes Nature Center as well. And we have birthday parties there, which is kind of fun. We have different programs that birthday parties, the kids can come and meet the animals and have a little place for their cake and their games and things, and so it works out really well.
And if a scout troop is interested in working on a
Badges,
badge,
yeah. So scout troops come. We have programs dedicated, especially for badge requirements. We are doing teacher training now too. We're educating teachers on new science standards. So we have a teacher training series coming up in the next several weeks, where we're getting teachers to come in and we're talking about how we can help teachers teach the new NGSS Next Generation Science Standards curriculum to their students. Because a lot of teachers, particularly in elementary school, they're not particularly trained in the sciences, and so particularly natural sciences. So we're able to, with our staff and our volunteers, help them meet those mandates.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. I think that would be a great, fun field trip for a group of students.
Yeah.
And again, is that all ages, or is that younger students, or?
All ages. You know, the way school systems work, it's a lot of times easier for elementary students to grades to come because of their schedule. But we do work with high school students, particularly in our volunteer program. We work at all the VOAG schools in our area, and we're starting to work with colleges more to do internships. So we're trying to get college students to get the experience that they're looking for in their career track with us. So if they're getting into education, environmental education, we can train them, hands-on training at our place, or land management or forestry or any of those types of environmental sciences. We'll have a 3-month internship that we're working on.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Scott, for being with us today. That's Scott Heth, Executive Director of Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut. And I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean with Nonprofit World, encouraging you to find your passion and make a difference in someone's life today.